I am telling this story because silence almost destroyed me and my child. I believed marriage would protect me, especially when I was pregnant. I believed family meant safety. I was wrong. What happened to me did not happen overnight. It happened quietly, with polite voices, calm faces, and decisions made without my consent. If you are listening to this story, please like the video, subscribe, and tell me where you are watching from. Stories like mine survive only when they are heard. And sometimes, the truth saves someone else before it's too late. I was 7 months pregnant and still waking up each morning believing marriage meant protection. My body was heavy, my feet swollen, my back aching, but I moved slowly and carefully through the day because I believed this was what a wife did. I cooked meals even when smells made me sick. I cleaned rooms that were already clean. I folded laundry with care, telling myself order would bring calm. I believed that if I stayed quiet and useful, everything would settle down after the baby came. My husband left early most mornings and returned late. When he spoke, his words were short and practical. I told myself he was tired, that work stress made people distant. I did not ask questions. I did not complain. I believed patience was strength. I believed pregnancy was temporary discomfort for a permanent reward. I believed a child would bring warmth back into the house. His parents visited often. They smiled and asked about my health. They commented on my stomach, on how big the baby was getting, on how much rest I should take. They spoke kindly, but their eyes were always measuring. I ignored that feeling because I wanted peace. I told myself families have different ways of caring. I told myself not to imagine problems that were not spoken out loud. I spent long afternoons alone, sitting near the window, feeling the baby move. I planned names. I planned a small corner of the room where the crib would go. I thought about how I would protect my child from the world. I believed that carrying life made me important, that it gave me value no one could take away. I believed pregnancy made me untouchable. At night, I waited for my husband to come home. Sometimes he ate silently. Sometimes he stayed on his phone. I tried to start small conversations, but they ended quickly. I told myself this was just a phase. I believed that good women endure quietly. I believed love did not need constant reassurance. I did not see the signs clearly because I did not want to. When his parents spoke about expenses, I listened but did not respond. When they commented on how hard it would be to raise a child, I smiled politely. When my husband avoided discussions about the future, I assumed he was nervous about becoming a father. I made excuses for everyone, including myself. I believed marriage meant stability, not happiness. I believed safety meant having a place to sleep, even if my voice felt smaller each day. I believed loyalty would be rewarded. I believed silence kept families together. Those beliefs kept me calm on the surface, while fear grew quietly underneath. Each morning, I told myself tomorrow would be better. Each night, I told my baby everything would be fine. I placed my hands on my stomach and promised protection, even though I did not fully understand what I was protecting us from. I believed that being pregnant meant I belonged somewhere, that no one would push me out while carrying a child. I did not know that decisions were already being made without me. I did not know that my place in that house was being questioned, discussed, and prepared for removal. I did not know that my silence had taught them I would accept whatever came next. That calm routine was not peace. It was the quiet before something broke. The moment everything broke did not come with shouting or anger. It came quietly, which made it worse. It happened on an ordinary afternoon when my in-laws asked everyone to sit in the living room. They said it was just a family discussion. The television was off. The curtains were half open. The room looked calm, neat, controlled. That calm should have warned me. I lowered myself onto the sofa slowly because my body was heavy. My stomach felt tight, not from the baby this time, but from something I could not name yet. My husband sat in the chair across from me. His parents sat side by side, hands folded, faces relaxed. It felt like a meeting, not a family moment. I was the only one who did not know the agenda. They began by talking about small things, the weather, expenses, how life changes after a baby. Their voices were soft and reasonable. They spoke as if they were being kind. I nodded and listened, believing this was normal. I believed they were worried about us. I believed they cared. Then the tone shifted slightly. They talked about stress, about pressure, about how peace in a household is important. They said young couples need space. They said too many people under one roof creates problems. They spoke in general terms, never using my name. My husband stayed quiet. He did not look at me. I felt the room closing in, even though no one had raised their voice. I waited for my husband to say something. I waited for him to explain. I waited for him to include me in the conversation about my own life. He stayed still. His silence felt planned. His mother finally looked directly at me. Her expression was calm, almost gentle. She said this situation was not healthy for the baby. She said tension affects pregnancy. She said changes were needed for everyone's well-being. She spoke as if she was helping me. I looked at my husband then. I searched his face for reassurance, for protection, for anything that said I was not alone. He looked down at the floor. That was when the truth began to sink in. This was not a discussion. It was a decision already made. They explained that it would be better if I stayed somewhere else for a while. They said it was temporary. They said it was for peace. They said it was the mature solution. They spoke slowly, carefully, as if explaining something simple to a child. No one asked me what I wanted. No one asked where I would go. My heart started to race. My hands trembled slightly as I held them together. I felt the baby move, strong and real, inside me. That movement made everything sharper. This was not just about me anymore. This was about my child. I waited for my husband to interrupt them. I waited for him to say no. I waited for him to remind them that I was his wife, that I was carrying his child. He said nothing. His silence grew heavier with every second. The room stayed quiet after they finished speaking. They watched me closely, waiting for my reaction. They expected tears. They expected begging. They expected acceptance. They had already decided which version of me they wanted. That was when I understood something painful and clear. They were not angry with me. They were done with me. I was no longer seen as family. I was a problem to be managed, removed, and explained away politely. The calmness of that room was what hurt the most. There was no fight to defend myself against. There was only a smooth, clean plan that left no space for my voice. In that moment, my marriage cracked open, and I finally saw how alone I truly was. The final blow did not come from my in-laws. It came from my husband's silence. After they finished explaining their decision, the room stayed still. No one spoke. No one moved. That pause told me more than any argument ever could. I looked at my husband again, waiting for him to step in, to correct them, to remind everyone that I was not a guest in his life. He did nothing. His silence became agreement. In that moment, I understood that this was not something being done to him. This was something he had already accepted. I felt my chest tighten as the weight of it settled in. I was being removed from my own marriage without anger, without conflict, without even a fight. It was being done neatly, politely, and with full cooperation from the one person who was supposed to protect me. That realization hurt more than shouting ever could have. It meant this decision had been made long before that afternoon. It meant I had already been excluded from my own future. I stood up slowly because my legs felt weak. The room felt smaller than before, even though nothing had changed. The furniture was the same, the light was the same, but my place in it had disappeared. I realized then that I was no longer being treated as a wife or a family member. I was being handled like a problem that needed relocation. My husband finally looked at me, but there was no emotion in his face, no apology, no fear of losing me, just discomfort, like someone watching a difficult task being completed. That look told me everything. He had chosen peace over responsibility. He had chosen comfort over loyalty. He had chosen to let others decide my fate so he would not have to. I felt a deep, physical ache as the truth sank in. This was not about the baby. This was not about stress or space. This was about control. They believed I had none. They believed I would accept whatever was handed to me quietly, the same way I had accepted everything before. They believed pregnancy made me weaker. They believed I had nowhere to go. What hurt most was not the idea of leaving the house. It was the way I was erased from the decision entirely. No one asked how I felt. No one asked what I needed. No one considered my safety or my future. I was spoken about, planned around, and dismissed without ever being included. I placed a hand on my stomach and took a slow breath. My child moved again, steady and strong. That movement grounded me. It reminded me that I was not just a woman being pushed aside. I was a mother being tested. And something inside me shifted at that moment. The shock gave way to clarity. I realized that begging would only confirm what they already believed. Crying would only make it easier for them to label me unstable. Arguing would change nothing because the decision had already been made. Silence, however, gave me time. Silence gave me control. I nodded calmly, even though my heart was breaking. I did not raise my voice. I did not ask questions. I did not plead. That calm response surprised them. They expected resistance. They expected drama. Instead, they saw acceptance. That acceptance was not surrender. It was strategy. As I walked out of that room, I felt a strange mix of grief and focus. Grief for the marriage I thought I had. Focus on the child I was carrying. The betrayal was complete, but so was my understanding. I finally saw the truth clearly. I had been abandoned while standing in the same room as the people who claimed to be my family, and from that moment on, nothing about my life would be decided without me again. They thought I was weak because I never explained myself. They thought I was dependent because I never listed what I had survived. Sitting alone after being pushed out, my mind went back to everything they never bothered to ask about. They never asked where I came from. They never asked how I learned to stay calm under pressure. They never asked what kind of woman quietly carries herself through loss without asking for rescue. They saw silence and assumed emptiness. They were wrong. I was raised by a mother who believed survival was a skill, not a gift. She taught me early that loud people attract danger, while quiet people learn how systems work. I learned how to stretch money, how to read documents carefully, how to listen more than I spoke. I learned how to watch patterns in people and notice when kindness became conditional. None of that came from comfort. It came from necessity. Before I ever met my husband, I had already lived a full life of struggle. I worked young. I took responsibility early. I learned how quickly support disappears when it becomes inconvenient. When I married, I didn't enter the relationship looking for someone to carry me. I entered believing partnership meant mutual respect. I chose stability because I was tired of chaos, not because I was incapable of independence. When his family welcomed me at first, I believed them. I lowered my guard. I shared less of my past because I thought it no longer mattered. I let them assume things about me because it felt easier than correcting them. Over time, those assumptions became labels. Quiet became weak. Cooperative became controllable. Pregnant became disposable. What they never knew was that I had been trained by life to rebuild from nothing. I had done it before. I knew how to move without panic. I knew how to think when others expected tears. I knew how to stay focused when emotions tried to take over. These were not things I learned from comfort. These were things I learned from loss. I remembered the times I had slept in unfamiliar places and still managed to stand up the next morning and move forward. I remembered learning how to read people quickly because trust was not guaranteed. I remembered choosing silence because it kept me safe, not because I had nothing to say. That silence had protected me more times than anyone knew. As I sat there, pregnant and alone, I realized how much they had misjudged me. They believed I depended on them because I did not remind them otherwise. They believed I would break because I had not shown them how strong I was. They believed my value came from their approval. In reality, my value existed long before them. I thought about how my husband had never once asked me what I wanted for myself. He never asked what I had given up. He never asked what I dreamed about before marriage. He assumed my world began when I met him. That assumption made it easy for him to step aside when others decided I no longer belonged. I understood then that my mistake had not been loving him. My mistake had been shrinking myself to fit into a space where I was never meant to disappear. I had made myself small so others could feel comfortable. I had chosen peace at the cost of visibility. That choice had consequences, but it also gave me clarity. The truth was simple. I was not starting from zero. I was returning to myself. Everything I needed to survive what came next already lived inside me. My past was not something to be ashamed of. It was my training. It was proof that I could endure uncertainty and still protect what mattered most. As I placed my hand on my stomach again, I made a quiet promise. My child would never grow up watching me accept disrespect as normal. My child would learn that strength does not always shout, but it never disappears. The people who dismissed me had no idea what they had just activated. They thought they had removed a burden. What they had actually done was remove the last reason I had to stay quiet. A few days after I left that house, reality settled in slowly. I was staying in a small rented room that smelled of old paint and cleaning solution. It was quiet, almost too quiet. At night, I lay awake listening to the sounds of people moving in other rooms, cars passing outside, and my own breathing as I tried to steady myself. I kept telling myself I just needed time to think, time to plan, time to protect my child. I had no idea that something completely unexpected was about to enter my life. On the fourth night, my phone rang. It was late. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another wrong number or a reminder call. When I answered, the voice on the other end was shaking. The person did not ask for my name. They asked if I still had the bag and if I understood how dangerous the situation had become. I froze. My first thought was that they had the wrong person. I told them they must be mistaken. The line went quiet for a moment, then disconnected without another word. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the phone, my heart racing. That call did not make sense. No one knew where I was staying. No one should have been calling me about anything important. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was a mistake, but something about the fear in that voice stayed with me. It did not sound like a prank. It sounded urgent. It sounded real. The next day, I could not stop thinking about it. I replayed the words again and again. The bag, the danger, the assumption that I knew exactly what they were talking about. My instincts told me not to ignore it. Those instincts had kept me alive before. I started thinking back through my past, searching for anything that could connect to such a call. That was when a memory surfaced that I had not thought about in years. My father had once been involved in helping authorities expose a financial crime. He was not a criminal. He was an accountant who noticed something wrong and refused to look the other way. After the case ended, there were rumors about missing assets, items that were never recovered. At the time, I was young and grieving his loss, and I never asked questions. I assumed whatever was left unfinished had nothing to do with me. Now, sitting alone and pregnant, that memory felt different. It felt unfinished. I realized how little I truly knew about that part of my family history. My father had taught me to be careful, to document everything, to never trust appearances. He had also taught me that some things are hidden not to be stolen, but to be protected. That night, the phone rang again. This time, the caller left a short message. They mentioned an address. They said the bag had been untouched for years. They said time was running out. There was no name, no explanation, just enough information to pull me forward. I felt fear, but I also felt something else growing beneath it. Curiosity mixed with possibility. I knew I could ignore it and continue surviving day by day. Or I could investigate and risk discovering something that might change everything. The decision was not easy, but my situation left me little room for fear. I was already starting over. I had already lost my safety net. What I had not lost was my ability to think. I did not tell anyone. I did not ask for help. I simply wrote down the address and planned carefully. I reminded myself not to jump to conclusions. I reminded myself that desperation makes people reckless. I would not be reckless. I would be patient. As I prepared to follow that lead, I felt a shift inside me. For the first time since being thrown out, I felt movement that was not panic. It was direction. I did not know what I would find. I did not know if the call was truly meant for me. But I knew one thing clearly. Life was offering me a choice, and I was no longer the woman who waited for permission to take it. Whatever that bag was, whatever it represented, it was now tied to my future, and I was ready to find out why. That night, everything I had been holding inside finally came out. I lay on the narrow bed with my hands resting on my stomach, feeling my baby move, reminding me that I was not alone even when it felt that way. The room was dark, but my thoughts were loud. I kept replaying the last few weeks in my mind, trying to understand how my life had changed so fast. One day, I was a wife living under someone else's roof, believing patience would protect me. The next, I was a pregnant woman with no home, no support, and no clear future. I cried quietly, so no one in the other rooms would hear me. The tears were not just for myself. They were for the child growing inside me, a child who deserved safety and stability. I felt guilt rise up, even though I knew I had done nothing wrong. I questioned every decision I had ever made. I wondered if I should have spoken up sooner, if I should have fought harder, if silence had been a mistake instead of a shield. For a moment, I considered going back. The thought crept in slowly, almost gently. I imagined apologizing even though I had nothing to apologize for. I imagined asking for another chance, promising to be quieter, smaller, easier to ignore. I told myself it would only be temporary, just until I could stand on my own feet. That idea scared me more than being alone. It meant teaching my child that mistreatment was something to accept. As I lay there, I realized how often women like me are taught to endure instead of escape. I had endured comments, control, and disrespect for years because I believed endurance was strength. Now I understood that endurance without boundaries becomes surrender. That realization hurt, but it also cleared something in my mind. My hand rested over my belly again, and I focused on the steady rhythm of my breathing. I started talking quietly in my head, not to anyone else, but to myself. I reminded myself that I had survived before. I reminded myself of my mother's voice, telling me that dignity is something no one can take unless you hand it over. I reminded myself that I was still capable, still thinking, still moving forward. Fear was still there. I was afraid of what would happen next, afraid of making the wrong choice, afraid of trusting the strange phone call that had led me to this moment of uncertainty. But beneath the fear, something stronger was forming. Determination. The kind that does not shout or rush, but stands firm. I realized that I was no longer fighting for comfort. I was fighting for my child's future. That changed everything. Every decision now carried weight beyond my own pain. I could not afford to be reckless. But I also could not afford to be passive. The world had already shown me what happened when I waited for kindness from people who had none to give. I sat up slowly and turned on the small lamp by the bed. I looked around the room, at the thin walls and borrowed furniture, and I felt something settle inside me. This place was temporary. My situation was temporary. The story was not finished yet. The thought of the mysterious bag came back into my mind. It no longer felt like a threat. It felt like a question, a test. Would I step forward, or would I step back into the shadows I had just escaped? I did not know what I would find, but I knew what I could not return to. By the time the night grew quiet again, my tears had stopped. My face felt tired, but my thoughts were steady. I lay back down and placed both hands over my belly, making a promise I intended to keep. I would not beg for a place where I was not wanted. I would not raise my child in fear or silence. Whatever came next, I would meet it standing. That night did not give me answers, but it gave me resolve. And for the first time since being abandoned, I felt something close to strength returning. The next morning, I woke up with a clear head. Fear was still there, but it no longer controlled me. I washed my face, dressed slowly, and packed only what I needed. I kept thinking about the phone call from the night before. The voice had sounded nervous, rushed, and certain that I knew something I did not. A bag, an address, a short pause before the line went dead. I understood that this was not something I could ignore. Not now. Not with a child depending on me. I wrote the address down again, carefully, making sure I had it right. I checked it twice. Then I sat for a moment, breathing, listening to the quiet of the room. I reminded myself to stay calm and alert. I was not chasing hope. I was checking facts. That mindset mattered. It kept me steady as I stepped outside. The place was not far. I took a bus, sitting near the front, watching each stop pass. My hands rested on my stomach, and I moved slowly when I stood up. I did not want attention. I wanted to arrive, look, and leave if needed. The address led me to an old storage facility near a row of closed shops. The paint was faded. The gate creaked when it opened. It looked forgotten, like many things that no longer mattered to anyone else. Inside, the air smelled of dust and metal. Rows of lockers lined the hallway. Some were broken, some sealed, some marked with old numbers. I walked slowly, counting, matching what I had written down. My heart beat faster, but my steps stayed careful. I kept telling myself that I could turn around at any time. Nothing forced me to continue. That choice gave me control. I stopped at the locker that matched the address note. It was old, scratched, and locked. I looked around. No one was watching. The place was quiet. I checked behind the locker, remembering the caller's words. There, tucked into a narrow space, was a large bag, heavy fabric, dark color, clean but dusty from being untouched. I did not open it right away. I stood there, letting the moment settle. I thought about what this could mean. I thought about risk. I thought about responsibility. I thought about my child. Then I lifted the bag carefully and set it on the floor in front of me. The weight surprised me. This was not empty, not symbolic. It was real. I checked the lock. It was intact. No sign of damage, no sign of recent use. I did not rush. I did not panic. I did what I had learned to do over years of surviving quietly. I observed. I took notes in my head. I checked the surroundings again. Then I opened the bag. Inside were stacks of cash, neatly wrapped, labeled, and protected. The sight made my hands shake, but I steadied them. I counted slowly, not every bill, but enough to understand the scale. This was not a mistake. This was not a prank. This was money that had been placed, secured, and left alone on purpose. I closed the bag and sat down on the floor, leaning against the locker. I needed a moment. My thoughts moved fast, but my actions had to stay slow. I did not celebrate. I did not cry. I focused on what came next: legality, safety, proof. I remembered stories from my past, things my family had talked about, cases my late father had mentioned years ago. Something clicked. A memory aligned with the labels inside the bag. I understood that this money was tied to an old case, one that had been resolved, documented, and legally cleared. The funds had been returned, assigned, and then forgotten. Not stolen, not hidden, waiting. I checked the documents tucked into a side pocket. Dates, case numbers, official stamps. It was all there. I zipped the bag closed and stood up slowly. I did not feel rich. I felt responsible. This was not a rescue handed to me. It was an opportunity that required care. I left the storage unit the same way I entered, calm and quiet. On the bus ride back, I kept the bag close and my eyes open. Back in my room, I set the bag down and locked the door. I made calls to verify what I had seen. I took notes. I planned the next steps. I did not rush to change my life in a single hour. I chose patience again, but this time with power behind it. By the end of the day, I knew one thing clearly. I was no longer trapped. I was no longer at the mercy of people who had turned their backs on me. I had found the means to protect my child and myself. And this time, I would move forward on my terms. That night, I did not sleep. I lay on the narrow bed with one hand on my stomach and the other resting near the bag, listening to my own breathing. My body was tired, but my mind stayed awake. I kept thinking about how fast life had turned. Just days earlier, I was standing in my in-laws' living room being told I was no longer welcome. I had walked out with a small bag, no plan, and a child inside me depending on my strength. Now, sitting in a quiet room, I understood that everything had changed. Not because someone rescued me, but because I stayed alert when it mattered most. In the morning, I moved carefully. I ate slowly. I drank water. I reminded myself that panic makes mistakes, and mistakes cost everything. I did not call anyone from my past. I did not celebrate. I focused on confirmation. I needed to know the truth fully, not just emotionally, but legally. I contacted the number listed in the documents found inside the bag. I spoke calmly, asked questions, and listened more than I talked. Each answer confirmed what I already suspected. The money was real. The ownership trail was clean. The funds were released years ago and left unclaimed after a legal settlement. My name was there, linked through my late father's work and final filings. Forgotten by others, not forgotten by the records. As the details settled in, something inside me shifted. Fear loosened its grip. Not all at once, but enough for me to breathe without my chest tightening. I realized this was not luck. It was preparation meeting opportunity. My father had always told me that survival favors the patient, not the loud. I understood his words now more than ever. I spent the rest of the day organizing facts. I made copies. I stored everything safely. I learned what steps came next and what not to do. I learned where silence mattered and where action was required. I did not rush to touch the money. I respected it. I respected what it could do and what it could destroy if handled carelessly. By evening, news had already begun to travel quietly. Not officially, not publicly, but enough for certain people to notice. My in-laws were not careful people. They talked. They asked questions. They connected dots only after it was too late. I started receiving missed calls, messages that were suddenly polite, concerned, curious. The same people who had called me a burden were now checking if I was safe. I did not answer. What struck me most was how quickly interest replaced cruelty. Their tone changed because they believed value had returned. That realization hardened something inside me. I saw clearly that their kindness had always been conditional. It depended on what I could give, not who I was. That clarity hurt, but it also freed me. I thought about my husband. His silence during the eviction replayed in my mind. Not anger, just emptiness. I realized that abandonment is not always loud. Sometimes it wears calm clothes and avoids eye contact. That understanding helped me let go of any remaining hope that he would change. People reveal themselves when pressure arrives. He had already spoken without words. As the day ended, I sat by the window and looked out at the street below. Cars passed. People lived their lives unaware of what had shifted inside me. I felt something new, not joy, not revenge, but control. Control over my future, control over my child's safety, control over who would have access to us. I made a promise then. I would not return to anyone who only wanted me when money entered the room. I would not explain myself to people who never explained their cruelty. I would not beg for space where I was never valued. That was the moment everything flipped. Not when I saw the cash, not when I confirmed the amount, but when I understood that I no longer needed approval, permission, or protection from the same people who had abandoned me. I was no longer asking life for mercy. I was planning it. And from that point on, every step I took was forward, steady, quiet, and irreversible. It did not take long for the people who erased me to remember my name. Once the truth settled in, once the quiet signs became clear, they began circling back with a speed that felt almost desperate. The same house that had closed its doors to me now seemed to open its windows, letting concern and regret drift out like a performance. Messages appeared on my phone from numbers I had not heard from in days. The tone was careful, polite, almost gentle. It was a sharp contrast to the calm cruelty I had faced when I was 7 months pregnant and unwanted. My husband was the first to reach out directly. His messages were long and full of explanation. He spoke about pressure, about his parents' influence, about stress and confusion. He wrote as if circumstances had pushed him into silence, as if his lack of action had been an accident instead of a choice. Reading his words, I felt no anger rise, only clarity. Silence under pressure is still a decision. Watching harm and doing nothing is still participation. Soon after, his parents followed. Their messages were different. They spoke of family unity, tradition, forgiveness. They used words like misunderstanding and mistake, as if throwing a pregnant woman out of her home could be softened by language. They mentioned the baby. They mentioned the future. They mentioned reconciliation. What they never mentioned was responsibility. Not once did they acknowledge the fear, the hunger, or the nights I spent wondering how to protect the child inside me. I noticed something important in every message. None of them asked how I was emotionally. None asked about my health in a genuine way. Their concern focused on access, on solutions, on arrangements. They wanted meetings, conversations, a chance to talk things through. It was not me they missed. It was what they thought I now represented. As days passed, their urgency increased. Missed calls stacked up. Voicemails shifted from soft to strained. The words became more direct. Apologies turned into promises. Promises turned into expectations. They spoke about fixing things, about moving forward together, about starting fresh. It became clear that their version of peace required my return and their control. I listened to every message carefully. I learned more from their tone than from their words. Regret that appears only after loss is not regret. It is fear, fear of consequence, fear of exposure, fear of losing access to something they believe should belong to them. That understanding settled in me like a fact, not a feeling. When I finally chose to respond, I did so calmly and briefly. I did not argue. I did not explain. I did not justify my choices. I simply made it clear that I was safe, that my decisions were final, and that contact was no longer welcome. I placed boundaries without anger, because anger would have given them the illusion of influence. Calm removes that power completely. Their reaction confirmed everything. The kindness disappeared. The concern cracked. Accusations followed. They questioned my character, my stability, my gratitude. The same people who had labeled me a burden now acted offended that I would not return on their terms. That shift told me more than any apology ever could. I realized then that consequences are not loud. They do not need shouting or revenge. Consequences simply arrive when access is removed. When someone who relied on control realizes it no longer exists, the mask falls quickly. I watched it happen without engaging. I had learned enough. I thought about how easily they had dismissed me when I had nothing, how comfortable they were deciding my fate without my input, and now, how quickly they wanted me back once my situation changed. That contrast closed the door inside me completely. There was no room left for doubt. That period was not about triumph. It was about confirmation. Confirmation that walking away had been the right choice. Confirmation that love tied to condition is not love at all. Confirmation that protecting my child meant protecting myself first. By the end of that week, the messages stopped. The calls slowed. I knew they had understood, not because they agreed, but because they realized they no longer had leverage, and that, more than any apology, was the real consequence. They lost access not because I wanted revenge, but because they proved they were never safe to return to. I did not go back. That was the first and hardest choice I made after everything came to light. I did not return to that house. I did not answer the calls. I did not read the long messages filled with apologies that arrived only after money entered the picture. I understood something very clearly by then. Love that appears after loss is not love. It is fear. And fear is not a reason to rebuild a life around people who already showed me how easily they could discard me. I focused on one thing only: my child. Every decision I made from that point forward was about safety, stability, and dignity. I found a quiet place to live. Nothing fancy. Just clean rooms, soft light, and space to breathe. I went to my doctor appointments without stress. I ate properly again. I slept without fear of being thrown out or judged. For the first time in months, my body stopped shaking. My child felt it too. The constant tension inside me slowly eased. I set boundaries where none had existed before. I worked with professionals who helped me secure my future legally and carefully. Everything was done the right way. I made sure my child would never be dependent on people who saw kindness as weakness. I learned how important it is for a woman, especially a mother, to control her own safety. Not through anger, not through revenge, but through planning and self-respect. When my child was born, I held that tiny body in my arms and understood something that changed me forever. I had survived humiliation, rejection, fear, and abandonment, and I was still standing, not bitter, not broken, just awake. I promised that child a life where no one would ever have the power to threaten our home, our peace, or our worth. I did not raise my child around noise or pride. I raised them around calm, around routine, around honesty. I taught them that love does not shout, does not control, does not abandon. I taught them that family is not who shares your blood, but who protects your safety. I made sure they grew up seeing a mother who did not beg, did not chase approval, and did not return to places where she was not respected. Years passed quietly. The people who once pushed me out faded into distant memories. I heard things through others: regret, struggle, arguments, blame passed around like a disease. None of it reached me anymore. I did not feel the need to celebrate their downfall or explain my success. I had already moved beyond the need to be seen by them. The greatest victory was not the money. It was the peace. It was waking up each morning knowing no one could take my home, my child, or my voice away again. It was understanding that survival is not loud. Strength is not cruel. Power does not need permission. Looking back now, I see clearly what happened. They believed pregnancy made me weak. They believed silence meant submission. They believed kindness was ignorance. They were wrong on every level. Silence was my thinking time. Kindness was my choice, not my limit. And pregnancy did not weaken me. It sharpened me. I share this story for one reason only: not to shock, not to impress, but to remind women like me, older, quieter, often overlooked, that dignity is not something others give you. It is something you claim the moment you stop accepting less than you deserve, no matter your age, no matter your situation, no matter how alone you feel. They abandoned a pregnant woman believing she had nowhere to go. What they never understood is this simple truth: a woman who protects her child will always find a way forward, and once she does, she never walks backward again.